taking your thoughts, your memories of the 97 flood. 25 years have passed since that terrible event that happened here in the Red River Valley. Senator Kent Conrad was one of the leaders in the state of North Dakota at that time, and one of the people that everybody counted on for the type of information and conduit to the help that we desperately needed. And he joins us right now. Senator Conrad, good to have you back on News and Views.
Always good to be with you, Joel.
Well, I want to just talk a little bit about what that was like to be serving in the Senate at a time like that, because with all the different jobs that you had to do and issues you had to face, this isn't one that you could be ready for, Senator.
This wasn't on anybody's planner. But, it took over our lives. The next several years, I think every morning I woke up thinking of the to-do list for what we were going to do to help Grand Forks and Fargo and all the towns in between recover. And not just the towns in between, but Wahpeton, south of Fargo, was also very affected. I mean, it was an incredible series of disasters. As you know, the worst winter storm in 50 years, followed by the flood and the fire in many of the communities. The fire, of course, in Grand Forks, downtown Grand Forks. It was a stunning disaster.
So everyone was looking for help in making decisions before we lost Grand Forks, when we almost lost Fargo. Of course, we saw the devastation that happened in Breckenridge, Minnesota. And, my wife at the time was working at St. Francis in Breckenridge, and they couldn't get the elderly people out of the nursing home. I mean, they couldn't get them. They took them to the hospital, and they were, I think, on the second floor, where they didn't have the type of water and sewer system you would want to be able to meet the needs. A guy named Cal Michaels, a huge hero down in Breckenridge. You make your way north, the next thing you know, you're sitting there saying to Kent Conrads of the world, what do we do? I mean, that had to be a really hard job when everyone's looking to you and saying, all right, what do we do here? I mean, what do you think we should do?
We became very focused. One of the first things we did, Senator Dorgan, Congressman Pomeroy, and I, was invite Mayor Pat Owens of Grand Forks to Washington to meet with the leadership of Congress and the administration. And I'll never forget, we had a pre-meeting in my office, and we put up a giant tablet on an easel, and we listed all the things that needed to be done and what they would cost, just rough estimates. And John O'Leary, the head of Public Works in Grand Forks, was there. John Schmizik, who was the counsel for Grand Forks, was there. And we made this list, and after about an hour and a half, we had a list of over $570 million of needs just for Grand Forks. And I can tell you, it surprised even us how big the number was. And we knew immediately that we had a tall mountain to climb, because we were going to have to sell a rescue package for North Dakota and Minnesota. And we were going to have to do it in a not very favorable environment. So one of the first things that happened that I remember, Joel, was that Lucy Kaludi, my wife, was at a spouses luncheon in the Senate, and Hillary Clinton came over to her and said, I understand Mayor Pat Owens is going to be in town today. I wonder if you could bring her down to the White House to meet with me, so I better understand what's happening and what we could do to help. And so later that afternoon, Lucy took Mayor Owens down to the White House, and they sat in Hillary Clinton's office, and Mayor Owens described what had occurred. The worst winter storm in 50 years, knocking down power, and then, of course, the incredible floods that followed, and the devastating fire in downtown Grand Forks. And as Hillary Clinton listened to this story, she jumped up and she said, we've got to go over and tell the president what's happened. So they walked over to the Oval Office, walked in, and President Clinton then listened to the story, and he said, well, we've got to help, and we've got to marshal the resources of the federal government to help Grand Forks and Fargo and all these towns up and down the Red River. And of course, he then personally came to visit Grand Forks. So that was an incredible time. And after that, we met with the leaders of Congress. And I tell you, Mayor Owens charmed a lot of these senior members. You know, she had a way about her, and she charmed them. And, you know, some were more helpful than others. I remember going over to the House of Representatives to meet with Dick Armey, who was the Republican leader in the House, and a native of North Dakota. You know, Dick Armey was from Can-Do, North Dakota. Well, he was anything but can-do with us. He told me to my face that he didn't intend to help us at all. And in fact, he'd do everything he could to block aid, which is kind of breathtaking. I mean, that's how partisan, you know, people complain about partisanship now, and they should, but my God. I mean, he was over the top.
I remember that. I remember people from the state being called to try to talk to him that he might listen to because they were from the same side of the aisle as him. I remember Gene Nicholas and other people saying, what is with Dick Armey? He's from here. Why won't he help? And I think you got it done in the end without his help, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, we got it done without his help. You know, Earl Pomeroy, you know, you think about it, we got this incredible disaster package through the Senate. And, you know, Kit Bond was the former Republican governor of Missouri. You'd think he would be helpful to a state in need. He was the chairman of the Key Appropriations Subcommittee, and he fought us every step of the way. But we were fortunate because Senator Dorgan was on the Appropriations Committee. Congressman Pomeroy had a lot of influence in the House. He was on the Key Committee there. And he had many friends. You know, people liked Earl Pomeroy. And I was the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, so we were well positioned. And here's another sort of interesting insight. At one point, I was meeting with Ted Stevens right off the chamber in the U.S. Senate. And Ted Stevens was chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the U.S. Senate, a key player in disaster aid. And he was telling me all the reasons they couldn't do anything, and, you know, they'd be able to do a little something, but it wouldn't be much, and we shouldn't be counting on getting a big package because, you know, the budgets were tight. And I finally blew up on him. I said, you know, you didn't have any of these reservations when you needed aid for Alaska, his home state. I'm just asking you to show the same care to our state. And I kind of stormed off. And his budget, or his Appropriations Committee aide who was with him later ran into me later that day, and he said, you know, Kent, when you blew up and left him, he turned to me and said, you know, we better help him. And he did help us. That was one Republican who really helped us, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska.
So it's bad it took that, but I'll tell you what, the help was needed. I mean, it was so desperately needed.
Oh, my God.
You were there. You saw the people at the Grand Forks Air Force Base sleeping on floors. I mean, that was devastation.
You know, I think it was my Budget Committee staff later told me that the aid package that we got was the largest per capita, per person, aid package after disaster in history, the most generous. And, you know, you think the unbelievable series of disasters, and I think the evacuation of Grand Forks was the largest mass evacuation of a city in U.S. history since the Civil War. So it's hard to think back on how devastating it was. Virtually every house and every apartment building and every commercial building in Grand Forks was affected.
Yeah.
So the dimensions of that were simply stunning. Everything had to be redone. The sewer and water systems, the flood protection. You'll recall Lincoln Park, 600 homes had to be destroyed and removed so you could build more defensible lines to protect Grand Forks for the future. Fargo, much the same way, not as devastating because They didn't have the fire, but they certainly had the flood. And of course, we didn't lose Fargo. We really lost the flood fight in Grand Forks.
Yeah. I was working rural water then, Senator, and when you moved all the people out to the air base and gave them, shelter and a place to go for a period of time, they needed water. And so I and my good friend that I worked with for a number of years, Steve Hansen, went up to and spent, I think it was a couple of weeks up there working for Grand Forks Trail Water, and we reversed water to the air base. We ran lines on top of the ground through culverts so we could get them over roads, or through roads, I should say. Anyway, we got water to the air base. And when I went home, we were sleeping in the boardroom with sleeping bags in Thompson, North Dakota. And I don't think I've ever felt as sad and as proud as I did of North Dakota ever in my life since then. It's just you went up to the bar in Thompson after a long day. You had a beer and a buffalo burger, and there wasn't an enemy in the room. Everybody was doing what they could do, and I was just so proud to live here.
I tell you, I felt exactly the same way. I look back on that period, and I've never been prouder to represent North Dakota than I was during that period, because people really stood up. And, man, they helped their neighbors. I can remember so many cases where family would have an elderly neighbor who couldn't evacuate, couldn't self-evacuate, and neighbors took care of neighbors. People reached out, and the air base, I'll never forget what a tremendous job the air base did in welcoming people. And there was never a question. When we called the head of the air base and said, hey, we need to bring thousands of people onto the Grand Forks Air Force Base because they can't be in their homes, and there is no place to house these people other than the Grand Forks Air Force Base. There wasn't a moment's hesitation. The base said, we'll welcome them. We'll give them a royal blue Air Force welcome. That's what he said to me. So a lot of people were heroes. And I tell you, the city officials, Mayor Pat Owens, John O'Leary, John Schmiezik, Ken Veen, the city engineer, my God, the work that they put in to try to do their best to help the city recover. And, of course, Hal Gershman, who was head of the city council, man, he was fantastic. Was so fortunate to have somebody, Hal Gershman, tremendous business acumen, a lot of financial knowledge. It was so important to have him be in a position of leadership in Grand Forks because he really understood the dimensions of what had to be accomplished. And, of course, he was a tremendous spokesperson in Washington, helping people understand how things really added up. But, boy, the people of North Dakota, man, that was a proud hour.
Yeah, it really was. You did a fabulous job. I was right there in the heart and soul of it, watching and hanging on to every word. And I'm kind of proud of the industry I work in. Radio was there 24/7 with people and making sure we were a conduit for folks like you that had to talk to them. And so it's 25 years. I mean, Senator, did you ever think in a million years it was going to go by this fast? I mean, 25 years.
Well, one other thing we should point out, the Grand Forks Herald and the Fargo Forum did superb jobs. Mm-hmm. The Grand Forks Herald coverage won a national prize for their coverage. Mike Jacobs, who led the coverage for the Grand Forks Herald, I mean, it is an absolutely brilliant job. And we used those stories that ran day after day in the Fargo Forum, the Grand Forks Herald. I did blow-ups of the front pages of the newspapers, and I'd take them every day to the floor of the U.S. Senate, and I'd put those pictures on easels showing people, here's what's happening. Here's the dimensions of the crisis. Here's why we need a very generous aid package for these places to recover. And I will also credit my colleagues. One other person I should call out is Jim Ramstad, who is a congressman from Minnesota, from the Minneapolis area, who was, of course, from Valley City, North Dakota. Jim Ramstad also helped us over on the House side.
You bet.
So there were a lot of people who really helped out.
Senator, thank you. Thank you for the memories. Thanks for the time.
You bet. Always good.